So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to come to Galway and the possibility to share some thoughts with you on the importance and viability of regional innovation strategies. Since I'm coming from Germany and I'm working in the southwestern state of Baden-Württemberg, I hope you allow that I will, during my talk, draw a lot upon the experiences made in the southwestern state of Germany. So, obviously, at first sight, you might think, what do Baden-Württemberg and Ireland have in common? So maybe with a little help of Photoshop, you can see that the shape of Ireland as a whole and Baden-Württemberg might be similar. But other than that, there are obviously a lot of big differences. So Ireland is twice as large as Baden-Württemberg, but Baden-Württemberg has twice as many inhabitants as Ireland. So Baden-Württemberg usually is among the top scorers in the EU innovation lists, whatever compilations they have, but also features relatively modest economic growth rates, while Ireland, on the other hand, did feature for a very long time very aggressive economic growth rates and could attract a very large amount of foreign direct investment, which in the case of Baden-Württemberg is not very important. But nevertheless, just as Dublin is not representative for the whole of Ireland, Baden-Württemberg has quite a couple of sub-regions or sub-units which feature very different experiences of success and failure in the developing of regional innovation systems. So if you look at the economic history of Baden-Württemberg, and if you would look at what kind of industrial concentrations were important immediately after the Second World War, we would have to look at textiles, which in the 50s was very important, which is extinct nowadays, or we could look at telecommunications, which was up to the mid-90s very important in Baden-Württemberg, but is now becoming more or less irrelevant. But we have still prospering industrial concentrations like the automobile sector, or we have newly developing sectors like the biotechnology sector, which is concentrated in a geographically very small unit in the northwestern pocket of the state. Good, and this variety of experiences of success and failure, these varying processes of industrial learning and forgetting, will provide me with some examples for my overall argument, which I will present to you in the following order. So we'll start out with some remarks about the challenges of regional innovation, talk a little bit about the prerequisites for successful regional experimentalism. So I stress this term experimentalism, and deal with you a little bit about the mechanisms that will allow actually a region potentially to become successful and concrete. So I hope we will not talk too long because we are very hungry, I guess, so some of us might be hungry, so I will try to be rather straightforward. So, trend of regional innovation. So I'm here as a scientist, as a social scientist. I've also worked for a long time as a consultant, as I mentioned. And since I'm coming to you here as a scientist, I'm going to start out with a maybe difficult definition or a difficult thesis I wanted to start out with. And the thesis runs: the renewal of an economic region requires a simultaneous reinvention of organizational and regional capabilities. So I'm talking about renewal and not about adaptation. So the stress during my talk will be on this idea of do something new, create something new, complementary to the restructuring of regional firms, the region, its boundaries, its identities, its governance structure, its collective competition goods, and its political and social actors have to be reinvented in order to face the uncertainties of an international competition about costs and innovation, and the simultaneous and reciprocal reinvention of regional firms and government structures is only possible in an experimental, discursive way, which can be described as experimental regionalism. So actually the stress is on the last sentence, and what I would like to stress with this is the notion that the building of a regional innovation system, the building of regional innovation capacities, is a process. In some way, it's a journey that needs to have some kind of a destination, which has some kind of an aim, but we also should be aware of the fact that in such a process, the aim of the destination might change. At the end, we might be in another place, in another situation than we initially thought we would be. To give you an example, so I'm coming from where I'm working in Stuttgart at the moment, which is the capital of Baden-Württemberg, and the reorientation of the regional system of innovation there started in the early 90s, and the initial belief then was that the regional innovation system has to reorient itself because it was too much concentrated on the so-called old industries. And the general belief in the early 90s was that this would drive the region into a dead-end streak, and what would be necessary would be a reorientation, look towards new industries, towards new ways of doing things. And after 2 decades of experimentation, I think all people are happy in Stuttgart at the moment that the initial aim has not been realized. So Stuttgart at the moment is more dependent on its industrial core than ever before. But its innovation system, thanks to these efforts that have been done over the last 2 decades, is also stronger and more robust. It's become more stronger and more robust. So what is very important is the process, the aim to try to change things. So I guess after all the talks we've heard about, we are pretty sure that regional innovation is important, that regional renewal is necessary and possible, and in this process, endogenous capacities, region-specific assets play a very important role. Foreign direct investment truly is important. It's good to have it, but foreign direct investment is also a very slippery thing. It comes, but we cannot be sure that it stays. It might go away very quickly. Again, while the region always, in some way, stays, the region is space-oriented. The space does not move. We have to build our capacities here and try to work with what we have here at our hands. It's a learning process. We have to try to adapt to new challenges, have to develop new capacities, and which was a point that was also stressed in the previous talks, is without handing out something that's also a label for not so central regions. Over the last years, discussion very much centered on the metropolitan areas, but the attractiveness on the metropolitan regions. But if you look at statistical indicators, we find that metropolitan areas do not so good in all respects, actually. So if we look at employment figures in Germany, you would see that the biggest employment growth did not take place in the metropolitan areas, but actually in the more mid-sized urban regions that benefit much more. Stuttgart, for example, in spite of its economic success over the last 10 to 15 years, has 0 employment growth, so there's not a necessary direct relation. And this even holds true for creatives, the so-called creative industries, where one would also, so there's a strong tendency of creative people to move into the metropolitan areas, but a recent analysis showed that this is only partly true without any doubt. Metropolitan regions are attracting creative people more easily than, of course, the rural areas, but the most important employment growth actually did take place in the suburbia of middle-sized cities, which is interesting. But the reason for this is what was also mentioned before, that in this area we have a lot of these new incubator centers, these industrial zones, where actually a lot of employment has been created over the last years. We can also see this if you look at the different kinds of regional innovation systems that we would find in Baden-Württemberg. Baden-Württemberg is relatively big, so you have a whole variety of regional innovation systems there. Most of the time when people talk about Baden-Württemberg, they think about Stuttgart, Daimler, Porsche, Bosch, and some other big companies that characterize the outlook of this city, and in some way also Baden-Württemberg, but there are also other types of regional innovation systems that are to a certain degree based on concentration of industries, but usually a regional innovation system is not only based on one dominant industry. But just to give you some examples, we do have a couple of traditional local clusters of small and medium-sized industries. For example, Tuttlingen, medical instruments. There you have basically medical instruments in this rather small and mid-sized city, or in Pforzheim, another medium-sized city in Baden-Württemberg. We have the highest concentration of jewelry producing firms in all of Germany. And you have also, of course, emergent, geographically high concentrated high technology clusters, like the biotechnology cluster in the city of Heidelberg. All these regional innovation systems are different. So we would say, is there something that's true for all of them? From an institutional point of view, one would say no. I mean, if you look at the role of the universities, it's different. So for example, in this traditional local clusters, universities do not play a very significant role, but on the other hand, in the Heidelberg biotechnology cluster, universities are essential. Without the universities, no biotechnology cluster. So the type of firms engaged in these innovation systems is different, ranging from these multinational companies in the region of Stuttgart, or these medium-sized firms in these medium clusters, to these newly developing firms, also relatively small firms in the biotechnology cluster. Meaning to say that how a regional innovation system should look like depends very much on what kind of actors you find there and what the actors actually want to achieve. So not every cluster essentially needs, for example, the universities. I think that they are very important. Not every cluster actually needs networking efforts. So Tuttlingen, for example, is famous for the fact that the people there, the companies that do not network, they do not need it. So when you build up a regional system of innovation, what you should look very carefully at is what are the needs actually of the actors that you find there, and how can you answer the needs of them in the way of building organizations and institutions. So in this way, the role of the OECD and the recommendations of the OECD were mentioned, and I'll just repeat this very quickly just to show the new role that regional innovation policy has been assigned and the different way regional innovation policy nowadays should work in contrast to the past, so that the actor who does regional innovation system should be situated within the system, should be talking with the actors in the system, should be not one who says what the actor should be doing, but should rather work as a facilitator, should deal with problems that arise out of the coordination between the actors. So a regional system of innovation rests in the belief that what actually counts is that you have a working coordination between the actors, between the elements of a system, and the system does not work if the coordination of the different elements of the system does not work. It needs to have something like a mission where we want to go, and the policies are very diverse that we can use in order to develop a specific mission that is worked out, developed by the regional actors. And of course, the regional actors could be in a position, once they have agreed upon an aim, to put this, or to try to realize this aim. So strategic decision making should be possible, and the resources should be at hand that would allow to put these decisions to work. So actually the literature is full of checklists, what you should take into consideration when you do something like this. So if you would have hired me as a consultant, I would also have provided something like a checklist with things where you can read like this, that what you should do is not technology oriented but innovation oriented, more easily said than done. We can talk very quickly about what kind of technologies we want, but it's far more difficult to work out what means innovation, what actually can be brought to the market effectively, what does the market want. It's better to build on existing strengths that exist in the regions, so what kind of capacities are there. It's good to have a diverse set of competencies. So we all know that innovation very much rests on the belief that the knowledge from different parts, from different disciplines meets and comes together, create something new. You need should support horizontal cooperation among the actors within a regional system of innovation, and what we also mentioned before, you need also, of course, global extensions, and should, instead of trying to develop new organizations, try to reorient organizations that are already working within the region. What is a checklist? So, if I would look at the experience made in the region of Stuttgart, which was a successful experience, and a lot of these points have been violated. So, building on existing strengths was not the initial aim of this reorientation move. Also, new organizations were created, not all organizations reoriented, because one had the impression this is much too worrisome, much too difficult to try to persuade the existing organizers to move away from the old traditional paths of development. And this brings actually to the point that what is essential is how do I bring these checklists into action. Checklists are on one hand very important, but on the other hand, for me it's as an observer, what counts is under what specific circumstances can certain things be realized, what are the essential preconditions that you need that you can actually at the end become successful. And these examples that I showed you before were in one way unique, in the sense that the Pforzheim chivalry cluster cannot be compared to the Stuttgart automotive cluster. They were totally different. But on the other hand, when you think about bringing it forward, you have to combine the idea that I did it my way. So each region has to attempt to do it in its way, what they think it's best, with some mechanism, nevertheless, that makes successful reorientations comparable. So if you do look at successful reorientations, what you do find there that you have a group of actors who've developed a common idea about what is going wrong or what could be better, where are we heading to. So what you need to develop, what they were developing, something like a collective construction of threat or opportunity. In the Stuttgart example, the idea that they have to move away from old industry, and this belief was shared by a group of actors who were not coming from the old dominant industries, but who were pushing forward this aim very aggressively. And in order to be successful with your attempts to do reorientation, you need something like an organizational appropriation. So in the case of Stuttgart, similar to what was mentioned here before, in the case of Stuttgart in the early 90s, a new regional body was instituted, a new regional agency was founded, and this regional agency had as a sole goal to do things that the already established agencies were not able or willing to do, otherwise also couldn't have been put into practice because of the conflicts that were involved in this process. But nevertheless, there was something like a new organizational level introduced with the sole purpose to try to realize these new goals. Of course, resources were necessary to do this, competences were necessary to do this, and this organization eventually actually was successful in getting the resources and the competencies necessary to do this. And of course, following this innovative action in framing, developing the idea about what Stuttgart is all about, I mean, to give you some examples, what has been done in the area of the region of Stuttgart, in this newly established region of Stuttgart. What they were trying to do were develop some kind of cluster policies at a very low resource level. We were thinking about what kind of clusters beyond automotive, electronics, machinery could be possible. A variety of networking platforms for actors within the region were established. Image campaigns were run. In some regions heightened up in the late 90s, where this regional agency hired an airplane in New York, and this airplane was flying over New York with a banner saying, "Come back to Stuttgart." So it was not very successful in attracting maybe potential people from Stuttgart coming back to Stuttgart to work there, but the essential thing was to make visible to the people in New York, which then was addressed because it was this multimedia IT hub, so that Stuttgart is also something in this area, maybe, and important. So other things that were initiated were competence centers, where the aim was to build on regionally available competences, to bring actors together, and by linking them, maybe develop new concentrations, new capabilities. Also, what has been mentioned here before, what was also introduced was regional reports. So since the mid-90s, we have constant reporting about what's going on within the region, where is the region heading, where are problems, and where are success stories. Good, this is actually not difficult because if we compare it to Pforzheim jewelry cluster, which I mentioned before, which in the early 90s was also in a very difficult economic situation. And meanwhile, since even more difficult economic situation than in the early 90s, but there, when you look at this situation, there were no actors available who could form something like a vision or an idea what the region should be doing, which direction it should be heading. So I was also present in some of these talks they had, where should the region head, and there was no idea, really no common idea what the region should do. There was no common interpretation what are actually the problems. Why is the jewelry industry or other industries in the Pforzheim region not working as they are expected to do? They tried also to introduce a new organizational level, a new regional authority, but it did not work because this regional authority was mainly run by the traditional local people who were already run before their respective activities, and they were not giving them any funds, not giving them any competences. So you also have this regional authority there, but it does not really work. So this also implies that maybe this would not work also in other areas here. What Stuttgart has done, I mean, it's difficult to copy regional success stories. So Stuttgart very much builds on a specific tradition, on a specific idea of how things are to be done, and just picking out one element of the success story and try to put it somewhere else, try to integrate it in another region, another regional innovation system might be actually difficult. Just to draw an analogy from football, so Bayern München in Germany is the most wealthy and well-known team, and every year they buy something like half a dozen very good players, cost a lot of money, and they come from clubs, they play in their respective national teams, but every year usually only one or two of these players actually make it into the team, and the other do not fit. So it's a fit problem, so you can easily put one element out of another system into the new system and think this will work. So it needs a lot of fine-tuning actually, and a lot of consideration, because most regions do not have the financial resources that kind of München has, so they can't afford to attempt 6 and then be happy if one works. So usually you have only 1 or 2 attempts that you can make, and then it should at the end really work. So that is very careful. So what I wanted to say is that the reorientation of regional innovation capacities can be looked upon as something like a social movement. So it's a movement that when we bring about, actors meet, trying to realize an aim that it's an aim that's different from what's usually being done. And in this process, of course, social actors play a very essential role. Actors who are able to tell about what the new aim, the new mission might be, and actors who have the capabilities to develop new ideas, to also move beyond their original aims when this movement is becoming sort of like successful. So to go back to our Stuttgart example, in the beginning there were a lot of actors who were saying, yeah, I mean, Stuttgart has to become a multimedia capital, or Stuttgart has to become a biotechnology hub. And these actors were without any doubt very instrumental in the beginning of this movement because they were attracting attention and were mobilizing forces. But on the long run, of course, I mean, Daimler, Bosch, you would not fit under the umbrella of a multimedia city or a biotechnology city. So what you need also is then people who are able then again to reach out and bring these incumbent actors, the existing companies, under a new common umbrella, and in this process the identity of the whole region and of the actors involved there has been transformed. Good, but it's also clear that if you have a process of reorientation, this cannot go on forever. So a region, unlike a company, cannot close down easily and then move away. But a regional system of innovation has to stay, and therefore after periods of turmoil or reorientation, stable structures have to evolve again, in which it becomes eventually clear what kind of roles the actors are playing, what are their responsibilities, who is fulfilling what function, and so on. Would I skip this given the time? So, what makes regional systems of innovation successful? Main message for me is that there is no single formula or sequence of activities for building a successful regional system of innovation, but it's very much dependent on the contingent situation on the ground, so to say, and on the specific situational factors that we have to take under consideration. What is also very clear is that if you engage in such a process, you should not expect quick results. If they come, it's okay, but usually quick results are not to be expected, because if you build up new institutions, if you reconfigure systems, this simply takes some time and be open for the unexpected. So we all do have plans, but we all know that most of our plans do not come true, so we have to readapt them and be open for new challenges. Okay, that's been it. Thank you very much for your